The grand estate of the Lawrences stretched across hundreds of acres, a testament to wealth and power accumulated over generations. Albert Lawrence, the billionaire patriarch, stood at the pinnacle of it all. With silver streaks in his dark hair and an imposing presence, he was a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Despite his vast empire, Albert's greatest frustration stemmed from his only son, Adrian. Adrian was everything Albert had worked to avoid becoming: kind-hearted, idealistic, and uninterested in the ruthless pursuit of wealth. Where Albert saw dollar signs, Adrian saw stories and dreams. While his father built a world of stone and steel, Adrian dreamed of creating music and art. "You'll never understand the value of money until you understand the value of people," Albert would scold, his voice echoing through the marble halls. But Adrian, with his warm hazel eyes and quiet resilience, always had the same reply: "And you'll never understand the value of people until you see them as more than tools for profit." Their differences came to a head one fateful evening when Albert summoned Adrian to his study. The elder Lawrence sat behind a massive mahogany desk, an envelope in hand. "You're 28, Adrian," Albert began. His tone clipped. "It's time you started taking responsibility, not just for your future, but for this family's legacy. I've made a decision." Adrian frowned, already wary. "What kind of decision?" Albert slid the envelope across the desk. "Inside is the name of your bride. You will marry her in 6 months." The words hit Adrian like a thunderclap. "What? You're arranging my marriage now? You can't." Albert cut him off, his voice icy. "You live under my roof. You live by my rules. You want the freedom to waste your life chasing dreams? Fine. But you won't do it as my son. You'll marry the girl I've chosen or walk out of here with nothing." Adrian's jaw clenched. He wanted to shout, to rage, but he knew it would be futile. Instead, he took the envelope with shaking hands and left the study. The girl's name was Emma. Adrian didn't recognize it, but when he met her, his confusion turned to shock. Emma was a beggar, barefoot, clothed in rags, and with a haunting sadness in her eyes. She was everything Adrian's privileged life had taught him to overlook. Their first meeting was arranged by Albert in the heart of the city, far from the Lawrence estate. Emma sat on a cold street corner, a small tin cup in her hands, her head bowed low as passers-by ignored her. Adrian approached cautiously, unsure of what to say. "Excuse me, are you Emma?" She looked up, startled. Her face was pale but striking, framed by unruly hair. Her voice was soft but tinged with suspicion. "Who's asking?" Adrian crouched down to her level, his heart pounding. "I'm Adrian. My father said, well, he told me we're supposed to get married." For a moment, Emma stared at him as if he'd spoken a foreign language. Then she laughed, a dry, bitter sound that seemed too old for someone so young. "Married? To you?" She shook her head. "That's a good one." "I'm serious," Adrian said, though he felt ridiculous even saying the words. "This wasn't my idea. Believe me, I don't understand it either." Emma's laughter faded, replaced by a guarded expression. "Why would a man like your father want you to marry someone like me?" Adrian hesitated, unsure how to answer. The truth was, he didn't know. But as he looked into Emma's piercing eyes, he realized there was more to her than met the eye. And something told him his father knew that, too. The months that followed were a whirlwind. Adrian spent more time with Emma, determined to understand why his father had chosen her. She was reluctant at first, her walls built high from years of hardship, but slowly, Adrian chipped away at them. He learned that Emma wasn't just a beggar. She had once been a talented pianist, a prodigy destined for greatness. But life had dealt her cruel blows, an abusive stepfather, a fire that destroyed her home, and a series of tragedies that left her with nothing. Adrian was captivated by her resilience. Despite everything, Emma hadn't lost her spirit. She spoke of dreams she still clung to, of music she hoped to play again one day. And as Adrian listened, he felt something stir within him, a desire to help her, to see her rise above the ashes of her past. But Albert remained an enigma. Whenever Adrian pressed him for answers, the billionaire would simply smile and say, "You'll understand in time." One day, as Adrian and Emma sat together in a quiet park, She turned to him with tears in her eyes. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "Why do you care?" Adrian didn't have an easy answer. "Because you deserve a chance," he said finally. "And maybe I do too." Emma looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "If we're really going through with this, I need to be honest with you," she said. "There's something about me you don't know." Adrian's heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" Emma hesitated, her hands trembling. But before she could speak, a shadow fell over them. They looked up to see Albert standing there, his expression unreadable. "It's time," he said simply. Albert's presence cast a shadow over the tender moment, and both Adrian and Emma felt a chill run through them. His gaze swept over Emma, lingering just long enough to make her shift uncomfortably. Adrian rose to his feet, a protective edge in his stance. "Time for what, father?" he asked, his voice firm but wary. Albert gestured toward the sleek black car waiting at the edge of the park. "For the next step. You've been playing at getting to know each other, but it's time to take things seriously. Both of you." Emma frowned, her lips parting as if to protest, but something in Albert's demeanor stopped her. Instead, she stood, brushing off her patched skirt. "What exactly does that mean?" Albert's lips curved into a thin, enigmatic smile. "It means you'll be coming home with us." Emma's eyes widened. "Home? To your mansion?" "Precisely," Albert replied. "You want to be part of this family, don't you? Then it's time to see what that entails." Adrian opened his mouth to object, but Emma's quiet voice interrupted him. "Fine," she said, surprising them both. "I'll go." The Lawrence estate was a world Emma could scarcely comprehend. The sprawling gardens, glittering chandeliers, and opulent furnishings were overwhelming. Servants moved through the halls like shadows, their faces polite but distant. Emma felt out of place, a speck of dust in a world of polished gold. Albert wasted no time. That evening, he gathered them in the grand dining hall, a room large enough to seat 50 but occupied only by the three of them. "Emma," he began, his tone formal. "You've lived a life of struggle, and I commend your resilience. But if you're to be part of this family, you'll need to adapt. There are expectations." Emma's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "And what are these expectations?" Albert leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Grace, poise, intellect. You'll need to carry yourself like a Lawrence. If you fail, this arrangement will be reconsidered." Adrian's hands balled into fists. "You're treating her like a project, father." "She's a person." Albert's sharp gaze silenced him. "And she'll remain a person, but one who understands the weight of the Lawrence name." Emma met Albert's eyes, unflinching. "I'll learn whatever you want me to," she said evenly. "But don't think for a second you can break me." For a moment, Albert's facade cracked, a flicker of something, admiration perhaps, crossing his face. Then he nodded. "We'll see." In the weeks that followed, Emma was thrust into a whirlwind of lessons. Etiquette, history, public speaking. Tutors were hired to teach her everything from classical literature to the nuances of fine dining. It was exhausting, and there were nights when Emma collapsed into bed, too tired to even cry. But she refused to give up. Every time she faltered, she thought of Adrian's quiet encouragement, his belief in her. And though she wouldn't admit it, there was something about Albert's challenge that fueled her determination. Adrian, meanwhile, watched with a mix of awe and frustration. He admired Emma's tenacity, but he hated the pressure Albert was putting on her. He confronted his father several times, but Albert was unyielding. "You think I'm being cruel," Albert said one evening as Adrian stormed into his study. "But I'm preparing her for a world that will chew her up and spit her out if she's not ready. You'll thank me one day." Adrian's eyes blazed. "And what about Emma? Does she get a say in any of this?" Albert's expression softened, just slightly. "She already has. Every day she stays, she's choosing to fight. Don't underestimate her, Adrian. She's stronger than you think." As the months wore on, Emma began to change. She walked with newfound confidence, spoke with eloquence, and carried herself with a grace that surprised even her tutors. But beneath the polished exterior, She remained the same resilient, fiery soul Adrian had come to admire. One evening, as they sat in the estate's vast library, Emma turned to Adrian with a wistful smile. "Do you think your father's plan is working?" she asked. Adrian tilted his head, studying her. "If his plan was to make you shine brighter than anyone here, then yes. But I think you were always this incredible." Emma laughed softly, shaking her head. "You're too kind, Adrian. But there's something I've been meaning to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago." Adrian leaned closer, his heart racing. "What is it?" Before Emma could answer, Albert entered the room, his expression unusually grave. "Emma," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "It's time you told him the truth." Emma froze, her face pale. "You knew?" Albert nodded. "I've known from the beginning. But it's not my story to tell." Adrian looked between them, his confusion mounting. "What truth? What's going on?" Emma took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "Adrian," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'm not who you think I am. There's a reason your father chose me. A reason I ended up on that street corner." Adrian's mind raced, 1,000 possibilities swirling in his head. But before she could finish, a distant sound shattered the moment, a loud crash from somewhere in the estate. Albert's eyes narrowed. "Stay here," he ordered, striding toward the door. But Adrian and Emma exchanged a glance, both knowing they couldn't simply wait. They followed him into the chaos, their hearts pounding as the past and present threatened to collide in ways none of them could have anticipated. The crash reverberated through the estate, shaking the walls and setting the staff into a frenzy. Adrian and Emma followed Albert down the marble corridors, their footsteps echoing ominously. As they approached the source of the commotion, Adrian's mind swirled with unanswered questions. Emma's cryptic words, Albert's enigmatic involvement, it all felt like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't yet see. The noise led them to the gallery, a room filled with priceless artifacts and family heirlooms. A tall glass display case lay shattered, shards glittering across the polished floor. Standing amid the wreckage was a man in a disheveled suit, his face pale and gaunt. Emma gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "No, it can't be." The man turned at the sound of her voice, his eyes widening. "Emma." Adrian stepped in front of her protectively, his voice sharp. "Who are you? What's going on?" The man's gaze darted between Emma and Albert, his expression a mixture of guilt and desperation. "My name is David, and I'm her brother." Adrian froze, his mind struggling to process the revelation. Emma stepped forward, her voice trembling. "David, you're alive? I thought." Her words caught in her throat as tears welled in her eyes. "I thought you died in the fire." David's face crumpled. "I didn't. But when the fire destroyed our home, I thought you had died. I searched for you, Emma, for years. When I couldn't find you, I gave up. I'm so sorry." Emma's legs buckled, and Adrian caught her, steadying her as she tried to absorb the shock. Albert watched the scene silently, his expression unreadable. "But why are you here now?" Adrian demanded. "How did you even know to come here?" David hesitated, his eyes flicking to Albert. "He brought me here," he said, nodding toward the older man. "He found me months ago and told me Emma was alive. He said it was time for us to reunite." Emma turned to Albert, her voice shaking. "You knew this whole time? Why didn't you tell me?" Albert's expression softened, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "Because you needed to find your strength first. You've spent so long running from your past, Emma. If I had brought David back too soon, it would have overwhelmed you. I wanted you to face him as the woman you've become, not the girl you once were." Tears streamed down Emma's face as she processed his words. She turned back to David, who stepped forward tentatively. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," he said. "But I'm here now, and I want to make things right." Emma hesitated, her emotions a whirlwind. But when she saw the raw regret in David's eyes, she knew she couldn't hold on to her anger. She stepped toward him and embraced him tightly. "I missed you," she whispered. David clung to her as if afraid she might disappear. "I missed you too." In the days that followed, the tension in the Lawrence household began to ease. Emma and David spent hours catching up, piecing together the fragmented years they had lost. Adrian stood by Emma's side through it all, offering quiet support as she navigated the flood of emotions. Albert, true to form, remained enigmatic but subtly encouraged the reunion. One evening, as the family gathered for dinner, Emma finally turned to him with a smile. "I think I understand now," she said. Albert raised an eyebrow. "Oh. You brought me here because you saw something in me," Emma continued. "But it wasn't just about me learning to adapt to this life. It was about finding my family again, and finding myself." Albert's lips curved into a rare smile. "Perhaps you're more perceptive than I gave you credit for." Adrian laughed, shaking his head. "Don't let him off too easy, Emma. He could have just told us everything from the start." Albert smirked. "Where's the fun in that?" Months later, the grand estate was transformed for a celebration unlike any other. The gardens were filled with flowers, the air buzzing with excitement. Guests from all walks of life gathered, from high society elites to humble street performers Emma had befriended during her time in the city. Adrian stood at the altar, his heart pounding as he watched Emma walk down the aisle. She was radiant, her transformation complete but her essence unchanged. She was still the resilient, kind-hearted woman he had fallen in love with. Only now, she carried herself with a confidence that made her shine even brighter. As Emma reached his side, Adrian took her hands, his voice soft but steady. "I don't care where we started or where we're going. As long as it's with you, I'll be happy." Emma smiled through her tears. "And I don't care about wealth or legacy. You've given me something money can't buy. A home, a family, and love." Albert watched from the front row, his expression inscrutable but his eyes glistening. He had spent a lifetime building an empire, but in that moment, he realized the greatest legacy he could leave wasn't wealth. It was the love and strength he had helped foster in his son and the woman who now stood by his side. As Adrian and Emma exchanged vows, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the estate in a golden glow. It was a new beginning for all of them, a story of redemption, resilience, and the power of love to heal even the deepest wounds. And for the first time in years, Albert allowed himself to feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, not in what he had built, but in the people who would carry his legacy forward.